Everyone rode, past the old woman in the dust, until a cowboy helped her. She owned half the land. The morning light crawled across the dry plain, thin as breath, painting the dust in faded gold. The road stretched forever, silent except for the whisper of wind dragging through brittle weeds. Somewhere far off, a windmill turned once, creaked and stopped. The air smelled of metal, sunburned soil and memory. A cowboy rode alone, tall, quiet, his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much war and not enough kindness. His horse's hooves made dull thuds on the dirt, rhythm steady, patient, like a heartbeat refusing to quit. He wasn't riding toward anything, just away, from noise, from people, from the ache that waited in towns with laughter he didn't belong to. Then he saw her, an old woman, sitting by the roadside where the fence had fallen, her dress coated with dust, like she'd been part of the earth for years. Her grey hair fluttered in the dry wind, and her hands rested still on her knees, knuckles cracked like dry riverbeds. Beside her, a wagon leaned on its side, one wheel broken, groceries spilled and half buried in the dirt. For a long moment, neither moved. The cowboy pulled his horse to a halt. The animal snorted softly, as if uncertain whether to keep going. Everyone else must have ridden past her, he thought. The tracks said so, dozens of them, fresh. He studied her face, creased, sunburned, but proud. She didn't call for help, didn't wave, just stared straight ahead, like she was waiting for something that would never come back. He dismounted, his boots crunching on gravel. "Ma'am," he said quietly. No answer. Her eyes flicked toward him once, then back to the horizon. There was something in that silence, something heavier than words. Not helplessness, not fear, something older. When he crouched beside her, he noticed a folded paper clutched in her palm. Stained, torn, the edge marked with a seal. It wasn't a grocery list. It looked like a deed. And on the top line, in faded ink, one name was printed, hers. He had seen silence before, on dying soldiers, on broken horses, on people who'd given up long before the ground claimed them. But this silence was different. It wasn't surrender. It was defiance wrapped in grief. The old woman sat like a monument no one built, staring at the horizon, as if her eyes could still summon someone home. The cowboy watched her, hat in his hands, unsure whether to speak again or let the wind do all the talking. The paper in her hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the cold that comes when a life's worth of strength begins to fade. He offered her water. She didn't move, just looked at him once, measured, distant, untrusting. "Ain't got much left," she murmured finally, her voice cracked like an old fence post. "But this land's mine." She looked at the horizon again, voice lowering. "They took the rest. But not this." The cowboy's gaze followed hers. Empty fields, fences broken, a house collapsed in the far distance. Whoever they were, they had already won. Something inside him stirred, a memory buried under years of dust. His mother, barefoot in the dirt, standing between a banker and their small cabin, papers shaking in her hand as men laughed and rode away with what was theirs. He had been just a boy, hiding behind her skirt, too young to fight, too ashamed to cry. That same sound, the laughter of people who didn't look back, echoed in his mind now. He looked at the woman again, and for a second, it wasn't her face he saw. It was hers. The same stillness, the same silent fury. He could ride away. He should. The sky was turning red at the edges, and the nearest town was miles off. He didn't owe her anything. People didn't stop for him either, when he was crawling out of the war with a bullet in his leg and no name left to return to. But the way she held that paper, it wasn't desperation. It was the last stand of someone who'd already lost too much. He sighed, pushing his hat back on. "Reckon you'll need that wheel fixed," he said quietly. The woman didn't thank him, didn't even nod. But when he walked toward the wagon, she turned her head, just slightly, as if testing whether she could still trust a stranger. That small movement was enough. The cowboy knew he wasn't leaving. By dusk, the cowboy had fixed the wagon wheel and stacked the spilled groceries back into the cracked crate. The woman hadn't said much, just watched, eyes still sharp beneath the dust. When he was done, she whispered, "You shouldn't stay here after dark." He almost laughed. "Ma'am, I've spent nights in worse places than this." But she shook her head, that same quiet urgency that comes from someone who knows danger well. "They ride through at sundown," she said, "and they don't like seeing me alive." The wind changed then, carrying with it the faint sound of hooves. The cowboy turned, his instincts tightening. 3 riders came over the hill, their silhouettes black against the dying light. The woman's hand clenched around that paper again. "They said they bought it," she muttered, voice trembling. "But the deed says otherwise." He looked at the folded paper. Official seal, signatures. Legal enough to hang a man if the law ever cared to come this far. The riders stopped a few yards away. Dust swirled around their boots as they dismounted. One of them, a big man with a scar down his cheek, spat into the dirt. "Evening, Miss Edna," he said. "Didn't expect to see you sitting out here waiting for ghosts." His smile didn't reach his eyes.
"You know the deal's done."
"Ain't no paper gonna change that." The cowboy stood still, his hand resting near his holster, not to draw, but to remind them he could. "Lady says it's her land," he said evenly. "Paper says the same." The man's eyes flicked to him, measuring. "You a lawyer, stranger?" "No," the cowboy said, voice low. "Just don't like bullies." The leader laughed once, the sound thin and cruel. "She's been telling stories for years. Her husband drank the farm away before he put a bullet in his own head. All that land went to settle debts." The old woman didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. "That's what you told everyone," she said quietly. "But I signed that land over before he died. To me. My name's the only one left." The riders exchanged glances. The scarred man's smile faded. "You keep talking like that, old woman, and maybe you'll be next to your husband soon." He spat again, then turned to mount up. "Sun's going down. You best be gone by morning. You and your new friend." When they rode off, the sound lingered, hooves pounding like thunder in his chest. The cowboy stood still, watching the horizon. The woman's eyes met his. "Now you know why they left me here," she said softly. He nodded. "And now," he said, voice rough with resolve, "they're gonna wish they hadn't." The next morning broke soft and gray, the kind of light that doesn't promise much, just another day of trying. Smoke rose from a small fire near the wagon, where the cowboy was brewing coffee in a dented pot. The old woman sat wrapped in a worn shawl, her hands trembling slightly as she peeled potatoes. They didn't speak. Words weren't needed. In silence, they built something fragile between them, a rhythm, a trust unspoken but real. When the cowboy offered her a tin cup of coffee, she accepted it with a nod. Her eyes lingered on the steam, as if it reminded her of something she'd buried long ago. "You've been through war," she said quietly, her voice a rasp of wind over stone. He looked at her, surprised. "How'd you know?" She smiled faintly, not kind, just knowing. "You carry it in your shoulders. Folks who fought, they never walk light again." He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up her husband's old rifle, the one half buried in dust near the wagon, and started cleaning it. Hours passed like that. Small tasks, small breaths. He taught her how to load it, slow and steady, his voice low, his hands patient. Her fingers shook at first, but she learned. Every click of the rifle's chamber sounded like a heartbeat coming back to life. "My boy used to show me that," she murmured. "Before he left for the mines. Never came back." The cowboy paused. He wanted to say something, but the right words never came. Instead, he handed her a bullet and said, "Hold on to it. Never know when you'll need it." Later they sat by the fading fire. The land stretched around them, quiet, endless, cruelly beautiful. The cowboy took off his glove, revealing a scar that ran from his palm to his wrist. "Got that in Cold Creek," he said softly. "Wasn't the bullet that hurt? It was what came after." The old woman nodded, understanding without asking. She rolled up her sleeve, showing a burn mark along her forearm. "They lit the barn to scare me off," she whispered. Didn't work. They didn't say another word. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full. The wind moved through the grass like an old hymn. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt something stir inside him that wasn't regret. And as the sun slipped behind the hills, the old woman looked at him and said, almost to herself, "Maybe I ain't done fighting yet." He smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. "Good," he said. 'Cause neither am I. By the time the second sundown came, the wind had shifted, hot and restless, carrying the kind of silence that comes before a storm, or blood. The old woman's land looked endless under the dying light, but there was nowhere to hide. The cowboy saddled his horse, checked the rifle, and laid out what little ammunition he had. "You should get inside," he told her. She stood her ground instead, the folded deed clutched against her chest. "If they take this land tonight, they'll take it from every woman who ever tried to hold her own," she said. Her voice was steady, her eyes not. He looked at her for a long moment and nodded. "Then we hold." The first shot came before the sun was gone. A bullet struck the fence post, splitting it like dry bone. 3 riders appeared again, this time with torches and guns glinting in their hands. The scarred man called out, "You had your chance, old woman. Ain't no paper gonna save you now." The cowboy raised the rifle and fired once, a warning that cracked the air like thunder. The riders ducked behind the brush. Then the standoff began, bullets snapping through dust, the smell of gunpowder cutting through the wind. The cowboy moved with the calm of someone who'd danced with death before. He fired, reloaded, and fired again, each shot measured, deliberate. The old woman crouched behind the wagon, whispering prayers that tangled with the sound of gunfire. When one of the men tried circling around the barn, she took the rifle he'd taught her to use and fired once. The echo rolled across the plains. The man fell. She stared at her hands shaking, then at the cowboy. He gave her a look, not of pride, but of understanding. Survival doesn't ask permission, but the fight wasn't done. The scarred man charged forward, shouting, his torch swinging wild. The cowboy met him halfway, knocking him down, both grappling in the dirt. The torch rolled, catching dry grass. Flames hissed to life. The cowboy pinned him, breath ragged. "Why her?" he growled. The man spat blood, grinning. "She's sittin' on gold. Railroad wants the land. We just do the dirty work." The words hit like a hammer. The old woman gasped. The railroad, the same company her husband once worked for. Betrayal had started long before these men. The cowboy stood, pulling the man to his feet, and threw him toward the horse. "Tell your bosses," he said, voice low and final. "This land's already spoken for." The scarred man hesitated, then fled into the dark. When the fire reached the wagon, the cowboy pulled the old woman away. They stood together, watching the flames consume the wood, the dust glowing red. "You saved me," she said quietly. He shook his head, breathing hard. "No, ma'am," he whispered. "You just reminded me why I still can." Night fell heavy, carrying the smell of smoke and iron. The barn was gone. Only black ribs of timber still stood, glowing red beneath a bruised sky. The old woman sat on a rock near the ashes, her shawl pulled tight, her face lit by what little fire remained. The cowboy stood beside her, chest rising slow, one arm bleeding through his sleeve. Neither spoke. The land was quiet again, too quiet, the kind of stillness that comes when even the wind runs out of things to say. A horse neighed in the distance. The cowboy turned sharply, rifle raised, but it was only one of the attacker's mounts, riderless, reins dragging in the dirt. He exhaled and lowered the gun. The woman's gaze followed the horse as it wandered into the open field. "That one used to belong to my boy," she said softly. Her voice cracked in the middle, the sound fragile and human. The cowboy didn't answer. He walked toward the wagon's wreckage, rummaged through until he found the scorched deed, edges black but still legible. He wiped the ash away with his thumb and handed it to her. "Still yours," he said. She looked at it like a relic of another life. "For now," she whispered. The firelight flickered against their faces. Every breath hurt a little more, but neither moved to rest. The cowboy watched the horizon, half expecting another wave of riders, half wishing for it. Instead, dawn began to bleed into the east, gray and red and gold, like the sky was remembering how to hope. The war inside him quieted. For the first time in years, there was no one left to shoot, no command to follow, no ghosts shouting his name. Just the sound of an old woman breathing beside him, alive. When the wind shifted, he caught the faint smell of rain. "Storm's coming," he said. She smiled without looking at him. "Maybe it'll wash some things clean." They both knew it wouldn't, but the idea of it was enough. He helped her onto the horse, ignoring the pain in his arm. "Where will you go?" he asked. She looked toward the burned fields. "Nowhere," she said. "This is still home." He nodded, tightening the reins. "Then I'll stay till the rain comes." They rode slowly across the charred land, smoke curling behind them, morning light cutting through the dust like forgiveness. Neither spoke another word. Some stories end in victory. Theirs ended in survival. The horizon swallowed them whole, and the land, for a moment, seemed to breathe again. Weeks turned into months, and the land began to heal in quiet ways. The grass grew back where the fire had eaten it. The fences were mended one by one. The sky, once cruel and endless, now looked softer in the evenings, as if even the sun had learned mercy. The old woman still rose before dawn, her shawl pulled close, feeding the chickens that had somehow survived the smoke. The cowboy stayed in the small cabin he rebuilt beside her fields, patching roofs, breaking horses, saying little. They didn't talk about that night again. Some things weren't meant to be spoken, just carried. The town began to whisper, as towns do. They said the widow who lost everything now owned half the valley, that the drifters stopped trespassing near her fences, that the man who came from nowhere worked her land but never asked for pay. Once or twice riders came through again, wearing fine coats and fine smiles, asking to buy. She told them all the same thing, voice calm as stone. You can't buy what's already paid for in blood. Sometimes, when the day was long and the world too quiet, the cowboy would sit by the barn's blackened remains, running his fingers through the ash that still clung to the earth. He'd think of the war, of faces long gone, and of the day he almost rode past her like everyone else. He realized that saving her had saved him too, though neither would ever say it. One evening, after the season's first rain, the woman brought out 2 tin cups of coffee. They sat together on the porch, watching the storm move away. The scent of wet soil filled the air, and lightning danced far over the ridge. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Used to, not anymore." She nodded, satisfied, like that was the answer she'd been waiting to hear. As the last drops of rain fell, she took the old deed from her pocket, now framed and clean, and placed it beside him. "This isn't just mine," she said. "It's ours now." He didn't respond, just tipped his hat, eyes fixed on the horizon glowing pink in the distance. The silence between them stretched, warm and whole. The wind passed gently through the fields, carrying the scent of dust and rain, and something almost holy, and for the first time the land felt alive again.